Cool. So when I first came into blockchain, I thought this reminds me of something. It reminds me of a refrigerator. Because on one hand, hey, that works now. On one hand, you've got a refrigerator, takes in electricity, and it produces ordered water molecules in the form of ice and hot air at the back. And a mining rig produces ordered electrical signals, and hot air produces a lot of heat, and that's what made me think it must be a thermodynamic process. And the other thing about thermodynamics is that if you want to create something that's irreversible, and what we're doing is we're creating irreversible records, so it must involve the second law of thermodynamics somewhere. So I thought about this for a bit, and I thought, well, that means ice is like... I can't swing my arms around when I'm doing this. Ice is like Bitcoin. And that seems like a bit of a crazy concept. Obviously, there's the superficial notion that you need to spend money to create ice, just as you need to spend money to create Bitcoin. But I thought, somehow there's a bit of a deeper concept. What is it? Where is it? And then I remembered the motto of the Ross Mathematics program. Think deeply of simple things. And that's quite a simple thing to think about. So I thought deeply about it and got nowhere for a while. And then suddenly I remembered something that Erwin Schrödinger had written in 1944. Now, I wasn't actually alive in 1944, but he produced a very, very critical book looking at the thermodynamics that must be happening inside our cells in order to maintain the genetic material. And this was before anyone knew that DNA was involved. They thought it was proteins. They knew it was some sort of molecule, but they didn't really know very much. And he looked at the fact that living things preserve molecular records of inheritance against thermal disruption, and looked at the characteristics that must be happening, looking at it purely from the point of view of a physicist. And he realised that living things must eat negative entropy, that was the words he used, or orderliness from the environment, in order to preserve these molecules in a state of extremely low entropy, almost absolute zero. And the cells in your body contain records that have been preserved for over 3.5 billion years. Some of the genes in your cells are almost unchanged from when life emerged. So I thought about that for a little bit. I thought, okay, life is a little bit like a blockchain. Each generation copies a block into the next generation, and it adds new records, some mutations. And we've got a consensus mechanism called natural selection, which weeds out all the bad blocks. So that's kind of a nice idea. And then I discovered that it actually happens right down at the molecular level. And our ribosomes, when they're okay, I'll be very, very quick. Ribosomes are molecular machines that read blocks of code from inside your cells and convert it into protein that we're all made of. And the way that it does it, it takes triplets of codons. While we're going through this, there's going to be a few QR codes pop up to websites where you can read a little bit more about this. So get your cameras ready. So ribosomes have to match the right transfer RNA to the right codon. In other words, they have to find the right code. But the energy difference between the right code and the wrong code is very small. It's so small that, in fact, when you calculate how many errors must be the case, it's an error rate of 1 in 10, which means you could never actually transcribe RNA into proteins with an error rate of 1 in 10. But the error rate is actually 1 in 10,000, so there's something a bit different going on. What is it? And scientists looked at that for quite a long time and then suddenly realised, or worked it out, that what's happening and I'll explain it here, is you've got your RNA down the bottom here, a whole line of codes here, and it's building a new chain of blocks. These are the blocks called amino acids, and it has to fit this block onto the next one according to the correct code down the bottom here. And when you look at the diagrams in the textbooks, it makes it look like the correct code just slots into place by magic. In fact, it's not by magic. What it has to do is there's a whole soup of completely incorrect codes, and it has to sort through those in order to find the right one. And it looks like it should be finding the wrong one 1 in 10 times, but in fact it finds the wrong one only 1 in 10,000 times. And the reason being that it uses quite a clever technique of expending energy to find the right code. What it does is there are different chemical pathways that it can go up. If it goes up the right pathway, then some energy is spent. And that spending of energy increases entropy, which means it can't go backwards from that in that pathway. So it's using the expenditure of energy and the increase in entropy in order to enhance the selectivity of the process. So what's actually happening is very similar to what happens in Bitcoin mining. It's using energy to find a code that matches the code needed in order to complete the next chain, the next block in the chain. It's like finding a nonce in order to extend the blockchain. So that was an interesting idea, but it gets more interesting. So we'll just recap there. Ribosomes expend energy in a ratchet system so that they kind of go up one way but can't go backwards. Too complicated. I've written an article on this, which I'll do a QR code and you can follow that. A ribosome uses energy to search a space of possible codes to find the right code that can fit and extend a growing chain, which is just like crypto mining, searches a space of possible nonces to find the nonce that fits the blockchain so that it can be extended. So effectively, a ribosome, which runs in your cells millions of times a second, is running a proof of work system at the molecular level. So what do we actually get from this? Because it's actually quite important to think about this, because we're looking at how thermodynamics relates to blockchain. And although it may seem very abstract, it actually places constraints on the possible things that we can do with blockchain. So first of all, records are low entropy. In creating blockchain records, we're creating low entropy. To do that, you need a source of low entropy to create and maintain the records. Energy imbalance, in other words, electricity, is a source of low entropy. Living things eat negative entropy. And what Schrödinger worked out is quite interesting, without actually knowing the details of DNA, because they didn't know about DNA then. He worked out that genes must be aperiodic crystals. There's some sort of crystalline structure that was ordered and maintained almost at absolute zero, but not repetitive. And that gave Crick and Watson, the people who actually discovered the structure of DNA, a clue what to look for. And it's quite interesting, because when I went back to my university library to get a copy of this book that was written in 1944, I discovered that it was only available on short loan. They had 2 copies of it, and I had to wait 4 weeks for it. So it's obviously, it's a book that all molecular biologists are required to read. It also means that low entropy has a value. And that's something that I'll be exploring a little bit more in parts 2 and 3, because what it means is that things try to get at that low entropy, and other things will always be looking to steal low entropy. And that's an expression of the second law of thermodynamics. And we see that in terms of parasitism and predation. Living things have had 3.5 billion years working on solutions to deal with parasites and predators. That means to deal with malicious agents who are trying to disrupt your low entropy records. And in fact, when you look at the evolution of cryptocurrency, you can see that it's replicating many of the solutions that have already been worked out in living systems. So you can kind of look at systems that people are proposing and see, yes, that matches with something that living things have already worked out. So it's probably quite a good idea. Blockchains and order. Yeah, let's just skip that one. Go to low entropy means higher organization. So we have different levels of organization, both at the molecular level, and then we've got bacteria, very, very low level. Slightly more evolved and more sophisticated are eukaryotic cells. Then we build our way up to multicellular organisms, and then communities of organisms, and eventually governments and companies, which are expressions of order at more abstract level. And each of these higher levels of orderliness have their own collection of parasites that typify that level. So down at the bacterial level, we'll have viruses that feed on the bacteria. And at the level of companies, we'll have management consultants who who come along and extract money from the companies without actually producing anything. We're all familiar with that, aren't we? So each of these levels have their own type of parasite. It's actually quite interesting, and I'll be explaining this in my Medium articles, how you can look at political systems in terms of creating orderliness and the parasites that feed on that orderliness. It's quite an interesting way of looking at things. Next one. Where to next? This is all very, very abstract, and it seems like, well, is there any actual practical consequence of this? And so thinking about thermodynamics in biology, and we can look at the different consensus mechanisms that biological systems have evolved, and that kind of gives us a clue as to what consensus mechanisms are actually useful, because a few billion years of evolution has obviously sorted out the non-useful ones from the useful ones. And we can see quite clearly that proof of work, because it's innate in ourselves, is an important consensus mechanism. But then we can also look at it from the point of view of physics. And going down the physics track is quite interesting, and because the thermodynamics and time are interrelated. So in fact, progress in time is the second law of thermodynamics, that entropy always increases. And that gives us some interesting ideas about block lattices and sharding. So now, this is where the first part one ends. And for people who want to go and look at the Medium articles, then you can point your camera at the QR code and go to that. Otherwise, everyone ready? Right, I'll go on to the next one.
Hold on.
Oh, hold on. You got it? Cool. One more. I'm doing a whole series. First one is about what I've been talking about here, and then the next one is about proof of stake, and the thermodynamics of proof of stake is actually quite interesting. Okay, next one. Blockchain and thermodynamics. Now you'll notice I've gone straight from part 1 to part 4, and the reason for that is that parts 2 and 3 are ever so technical and detailed and terribly boring for an evening like this. So we're skipping that out and going straight to the practical stuff. We'll see. Now, increase in entropy is progress in time. Time doesn't increase as time progresses. Sorry, entropy doesn't increase as time progresses. The increase of entropy is progress in time. And a blockchain is simply a time-stamping mechanism that uses increasing entropy to define its own internal notion of time. Something we can learn from the way that time and space are interrelated in the real world. This is what's known as a space-time diagram. where you've got time going up this way and space going out this way. Now, in general relativity and special relativity, time and space are interrelated. So you can actually swap out time for space. And that creates an interesting idea when it comes to looking at ways of scaling blockchains. Because essentially what's happening is a single blockchain is just like a single line going upwards in the space-time diagram. But we've also got these extra dimensions out here which are to do with space. So I thought, right, okay, fairly obvious. We can create a block lattice. Now, in a block lattice, you've got exactly the same normal progress in time whereby the hash of one block feeds through into the next block, so to make things irreversible. But in a block lattice, we're introducing also the similar thing that happens in space, whereby information spreads out, so that each block takes the hashes from the previous block and also from its neighbours. So we can set something up so that we have an abstract space and our shards are arranged in an abstract space so that they share their hashes with their nearest neighbours, and that results in the whole thing being very tightly bound together. And because that results in massive increase in entropy, because there's more freedom, more degrees of freedom, it means that you get fast finality very, very quickly. Instead, in a normal blockchain, you have to go through many, many blocks in order to get finality. In a system that's sharded like this, where they're sharing hashes, then the finality becomes much more quickly because you get more confirmation. So in a simple square, two-dimensional lattice, then in the first step, you'd get 9 confirmations. That starts to get interesting. But then you've got a problem. And that is, the problem is that a state-based system, such as Ethereum, where we're thinking about the states of accounts, the notion of an account in a state requires a coherent concept of now. And you can't have that coherent concept of now in a sharded system. And this is something that Ethereum are working quite hard to deal with. UTXOs, because they don't maintain state, are much, much easier to deal with in a sharded system. And the reason for that, underlying reason for that, is that UTXOs map much better to the innate structure of space and time. So when I thought about this, I thought, it's massively easier to do sharding in a UTXO system. So I started coding my own sharded UTXO system, and then, but there's something missing. When you look at the normal UTXO set, you just see a number here. Okay, you've got your stuff and your unlocking script and the value. And in Zcash it'll be 4 something. In Bitcoin it's 4 of what. It's just assumed that is the native currency. And if you've ever written an accounting system, you can instantly see that what's missing is a token ID. So I thought, okay, well, we'll add a token ID, and that means effectively we've got an infinite number of different token IDs, all within the same UTXO system. And because of the way UTXO works, you automatically get a distributed exchange, and that automatically covers most of the utility of fungible tokens, ERC20, non-fungible tokens, ERC721, and the new standard which someone has developed because of issues to deal with thousands of tokens in games is the ERC115 system. But of course, with this, you just have token ID. Okay, you've got to have a special way of creating the token once. But you've just got token IDs, and the UTXO system covers everything. And with a little bit of clever scripting, you can have fan in and fan out, which means you can combine many different token types into one type. So, for example, you've got tokens for all the different parts of a car, combined into one token for the car. So it's actually perfect for games. And I created my own working proof of concept, and I got it running up to 15 shards. But why did I call it INDRAS Pearls? Well, I remembered what we've got is we've got this idea of hashes being shared between these multiple shards, so that the information gets distributed across the entire network. And that reminded me of a little phrase from some Buddhist scriptures. Indra's pearls, in the heaven of the great god Indra, because of course, it's Buddhist scripture. It's said to be a vast and shimmering net, finer than a spider's web, stretching to the outermost reaches of space. Strung at the intersection of its diaphanous threads is a reflecting pearl. Since the net is infinite in extent and the pearls are infinite in number, in the glistening surface of each pearl are reflected all the other pearls, even those in the furthest corners of heaven. In each reflection, again, are reflected all the infinitely many other pearls, so that by this process, reflections of reflections continue without end, which is effectively what I've got in this sharded UTXO system, where the hashes are distributed amongst the neighbours. So that kind of completes that little part. And there's a code you can use to go to the INDRAS Pearls website. And the reason I selected this is you've got all these little reflecting things, which is like the different shards sharing their hashes. But then I thought, okay, I've created this, what am I going to do with it now? And I realised it was perfect for games, and it would be absolutely brilliant because you can have infinite number of tokens, and it's brilliantly scalable because you've got multiple shards. And then I met up with Sarah, and we discovered that Sarah had been playing this blockchain game involving dragons that was actually a scam. And
Shall I tell
yeah, you tell the story.
Yeah, so it's called Copet, actually. I don't know if I can say that, but I have. And I was getting really... someone gave me a free dragon, a top dragon. So I started playing, and before long I had loads of money in this site. And then one morning I logged in and it was just gone. But they'd gone to a major effort. The whole site worked. There was 10,000 people in the Telegram group. And I was sharing this with... I was sharing this with John, and after many coffees and red wines and conversations, we came up with an idea for a game that merged that game and other elements that we wanted to include.
Okay, now we're on. All right. So that's why after talking meeting up a few times and developing this idea further, just a little bit about who we are, right? I'm Enrica, she's Sarah Louise, and we're a new project, and one of our main passions and ethos is to make blockchain accessible to everyone and anyone, right? We want to get the information out there in a more entertaining, more fun, easy to understand way. We want to do that in the form of doing videos, doing meetups, and games. So this is how we got into getting involved with John, right, looking into this game. So if you can do.
Next one, yeah.
So yeah, we've just been working on the idea, and we love the idea of using physical and digital collectibles. Obviously, a lot of you must have heard of CryptoKitties and how that pretty much went, well, it went really well, right? There are a lot of other digital collectible kind of games out there, but making it physical, right? Making it physical means being able to put it in shops, and that also means suddenly you open it up to a certain market, like kids or just gaming collectors. There's so many, it opens it up to a lot more different people if you have physical collectibles. And we had the idea of putting onto these physical collectibles, there's rarity, some of them are gonna be more rare, and on the actual physical collectible, most likely in the form of a stuffed toy, you'll find codes that will give you potentially tokens, and it's essentially creating an incentive of why people would want to collect it, right? Just briefly on it anyway. And then should we go on the next one? Yeah.
So we find that game playing can be a little bit isolating, and we wanted to find a way to bring people together while they were playing games. So welcome Tinder for Dragons. So the idea is that you win prizes, and to win the prizes you have to breed your dragons. And we thought, what better way to get people to meet up in real life than Tinder for Dragons? So here we've got Snap, who's looking for a non-smoker who can light his fire. And here we've got a fire starter. So they look like a match made in dragon heaven. So yeah, the idea is that we want people to actually meet, because we feel a lot of these apps are very stereotyped. There's one for dating or for finding jobs or for making friends. But how about just making it so you meet connections and you don't really know what they're going to be until you get there? So the idea is that you have to work together in order to progress in the game. So it's building communities.
I interject a little part here. In order to breed your dragons, in order to get them to have sex, they've got to be...
They don't have to have...
They've got to be within Bluetooth distance.
Next.
Next, please.
Oh, yeah, next.
So, there's... Yeah? It's very interactive.
Yeah, this is very interactive, and it's very ad lib actually, because we only practice this once. Does anybody remember the game Masquerade? You're all too young for that. This was a game that came out as a book well before computers were widespread, and it was a fantastic book that involved a puzzle that people had to solve in order to find a real physical object, which was a treasure buried somewhere in England. And it was a really hard puzzle to solve, but the thing is, it caught people's imaginations. It caught some kind of collective thing at that time, and so people were digging up each other's gardens, and people were digging up the whole country looking for this treasure and looking for the hidden codes. So we thought we'd somehow combine this idea of a treasure hunt with our Sex for Dragons thing. Sorry.
I don't know what I'm getting involved in. This wasn't the project that I signed up for. So the idea is that you can win a prize in every continent, and then to make it really international, there's one overall prize, and you have to break down culture and language barriers in order to work together as one whole world in order to win the overall prize. Next.
Okay.
Gosh. All right, yeah. I mean, so yeah, going back to the point of making blockchain accessible for everyone, right? I'm sure most of the people here are either invested, passionate, hopefully, interested in blockchain and cryptocurrencies. And like really, you know, it's something we're really passionate about. And that's why we started our project and in everything we're doing. We're really passionate about making blockchain accessible for everyone and anyone, right? So this game, the more we've been developing it and talking about it, the more excited we are at the aspect of it, really making it so easy. Like, you know, if people get into this game and start playing it, they're really just utilizing they're playing and suddenly getting into blockchain without even knowing. And essentially, obviously, we want mass adoption for blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and we really think like games are a great way into it, especially one like this that could involve so many people across different countries, any demographic, and yeah, that's why we're really excited about it, and hopefully you also like the sound of it. And you know, the next slide is
yeah, so we've got a QR code too. And we have a channel, and we talk about social conscious blockchain and tech projects, including AR and VR. And we just want to make this content relatable, fun, and bring in a new audience and bridge the gap between the next people that are going to get involved in blockchain. So connect to us on Facebook. We're also going to be organising some super clubs and some meetups with, like, hopefully they're going to be fun. So yeah, come and connect to us, and thank you.
Just say, yeah, if you connect with us there, then you can keep an eye out for the progress of this game that we're
And so it's been a bit of a journey. We started out with thinking about ice, and we've ended up thinking about fire-breathing dragons. And there is actually a link between all of those things, and it's to do with thermodynamics. And it's an interesting way of looking at blockchain. End.
Thank you.